The desert wind moaned through the canyon like a ghost chasing the last trace of daylight. Dust swirled around the hooves of a black stallion cutting through the dying sun's glare, its rider cloaked in the kind of silence that only men on the run could wear. Every creak of his saddle, every low exhale of the horse was swallowed by the vast emptiness of the land. The world had grown used to his shadow, an outlaw's ghost that never stayed long enough to leave roots. His name was Maddox, though few dared to speak it. To the law, he was a wanted man. To the folks in those broken-down saloons scattered across the plains, he was a story told in hushed voices, half fear, half fascination. But to one woman in a quiet valley town, he was something else entirely. He was the man who'd ridden away one dawn and left her heart bleeding in the dust. Cole had ridden through too many nights to count since then. He'd lost track of towns, of days, of his own reflection in cracked mirrors. But tonight was different. The weight of a small envelope pressed against his chest, creased and worn, sealed with the dust of 2 years. Inside it lay words that burned heavier than any bullet he'd ever carried. The letter wasn't meant for him. It was meant for her. Her name was Evelyn Shaw, the daughter of a preacher who believed heaven had no room for men like Cole. She'd been the kind of woman who saw goodness in the cracks of a sinner's face, who dared to look past the gun at his side and see the trembling man behind it. Their love had never belonged to the daylight. It thrived in stolen midnights, behind barns and in whispers carried by the wind. But sin has a way of catching up. Even in the wide-open West, Cole had once ridden with the Maddox gang, a group of desperados who believed the world owed them gold for every wound it gave. He'd left them after a raid went wrong, after blood hit the church steps in a town that never forgave. But when the name Maddox turned up on wanted posters, no one cared who'd fired the shot. The whole gang was damned in one breath. Now, years later, Cole's shadow still chased him, and yet under the endless stars, he found himself steering toward the valley he'd sworn never to see again. He told himself it was for the letter, to deliver what should have been delivered long ago. But deep down, he knew the truth. It wasn't about paper and ink. It was about a face he couldn't forget, and a love buried under guilt. By midnight, he reached the ridge overlooking the town of Willow Bend. Lanterns flickered weakly from porches. The saloon was closed. Even the wind seemed to tread carefully through those empty streets. Cole pulled his stallion to a halt and stared down at the place that had once been his only reason to stay alive. He could almost hear her laugh, light and fragile, drifting from the porch of the small white house near the chapel. He'd built her that porch once, back when he'd been fool enough to believe a man could change if someone loved him hard enough. But he'd left before she could find out whether redemption was real. Cole dismounted, boots sinking into the cold dirt. Every sound felt too loud. The buckle of his belt, the click of his revolver. He tucked the letter deeper into his coat. The air carried the faint scent of sage and smoke. Somewhere a coyote howled, and it felt like a warning. The walk down to town felt longer than any ride across the desert. Shadows leaned out from every corner, whispering memories he wished he could silence. The church stood like a scar on the land, its white paint peeling, its door creaking open with the night wind. He paused outside Evelyn's house. The windows were dark. A rocking chair sat empty on the porch, swaying gently as if stirred by ghosts. He didn't move. Couldn't. His hand trembled as it brushed the envelope. The letter wasn't his, but every word inside was written because of him. 2 winters ago, after a gunfight near the Mexican border, Cole had taken refuge in an abandoned cabin. Inside, he'd found a dying man, a deputy from Willow Bend. The man had been shot through the stomach, too far gone to make it home. In his bloodied hands, he clutched a letter sealed with Evelyn's name. Cole had promised to deliver it. But when he saw her handwriting, he froze. Because if she'd written that letter, it meant she still thought of him. It meant she still believed there was a part of him worth saving. He couldn't face that hope then. So he rode away, and for 2 long years he carried that letter close to his heart, too afraid to open it, too ashamed to deliver it. Now, with bounty hunters closing in and his sins piled high, he knew he was running out of time. He took a slow breath and stepped toward the porch. The boards creaked beneath his boots. His hand reached for the door, but before he could knock, a faint light flickered inside. The curtain shifted. Someone was awake. His chest tightened. The door opened, just enough for lamplight to spill out, catching the outline of a woman's face. Her hair was darker now, her eyes tired, but there was no mistaking her Evelyn Shaw. The sight of her nearly brought him to his knees. For a moment, neither moved. The wind rustled the dry grass, whispering between them like an old secret refusing to die. Cole finally took off his hat, lowering his gaze. Words wouldn't come easy, not when his throat burned with everything left unsaid. The lamp in her hand trembled slightly, light flickering across her face. She looked older, yes, but there was a strength in her eyes he'd never seen before. The kind that came from heartbreak that didn't kill you, just made you harder. She didn't speak. Didn't ask where he'd been or why he'd come back. She just stood there, breathing the same cold night air, as if trying to decide whether he was a ghost or a man. Cole stepped forward, slow and careful, and pulled the letter from his coat. He held it out, the paper shaking between his fingers. "For you," he finally managed to whisper, though his voice sounded more like gravel than breath. Evelyn's eyes fell to the envelope. For a heartbeat, confusion crossed her face. Then recognition flickered, her own handwriting staring back at her. The lamplight wavered. Her lips parted, but no words followed. Cole's gaze softened. "I should have brought it sooner," he murmured, his tone heavy as the years between them. For the first time, her eyes lifted to his, and in them, he saw the same storm that had haunted him through every mile of desert, the kind that never really passes. Evelyn stepped closer, her fingers brushing the letter, but she didn't take it yet. The air between them pulsed with all that had been lost: time, faith, love, and forgiveness left too long to rot. The night felt endless. And then, from somewhere down the road, a horse's whinny broke the stillness. Cole turned his head, instincts sharp again. He knew that sound, the restless cry of horses that didn't belong to townsfolk. Bounty hunters, they'd found him. His heart thudded hard against his ribs. He glanced back at Evelyn, her eyes wide, confusion turning to fear. He didn't speak. There was no time. He only pressed the letter into her hands and backed away into the shadows. As he disappeared into the night, the desert wind rose again, carrying the echo of hoofbeats and the whisper of a love story that refused to die. Dawn crawled slow across the desert, bleeding gold over the horizon, washing the night's secrets in pale light. Cole rode hard through the sagebrush, his stallion lathered with sweat, the echo of pursuit close behind. The shouts of men and the crack of rifles sliced through the morning air. Bounty hunters, hired hands who didn't care if their prize came back breathing or not. He ducked low in the saddle, bullets hissing past his ears like angry bees. Each shot stirred the dust and memory both, dragging him back to other chases, other deserts, other sins. The stallion thundered down a dry creek bed, hooves striking sparks on stone. Cole's coat whipped around him, heavy with the weight of that single moment. Evelyn's eyes, her trembling hands clutching the letter that wasn't supposed to exist anymore. He hadn't meant for her to see him again. He'd planned to leave the letter and vanish, a ghost finally laid to rest. But ghosts don't get to choose how they're seen. At the base of the ridge, Cole yanked the reins, sending the horse veering into the cover of a narrow ravine. The air there was still and sharp, the ground littered with bones bleached white by time. He dismounted, crouching low, and pressed his palm to the warm muzzle of the stallion. "Easy, boy," he murmured under his breath. The animal's flanks shuddered, nostrils wide. It could smell fear, his and theirs. Above, the hunters' voices echoed. They'd lost sight of him, but they were close. He could almost see their shadows crawling along the rim of the canyon like vultures waiting for something to die. Cole's fingers brushed the revolver at his hip. He had 6 rounds. Maybe 7 lives left in him if luck was kind. He hadn't known kindness in a long time. He took a slow breath, leaning against the canyon wall. His ribs ached, his throat dry. He'd spent years running, killing when he had to, lying when he didn't. But none of it ever hurt like standing on that porch again. Seeing Evelyn had cracked something in him that no bullet ever could. He remembered her standing in the doorway, lamplight trembling over her face, the way her lips parted but couldn't form a word, the way her eyes softened for just a heartbeat, long enough for him to wish he was still the man she'd once believed he could be. He closed his eyes. The memory cut deep, but there was no time to dwell. From the canyon rim came the crunch of boots on gravel. A shadow leaned over, a rifleman scanning the ravine below. Cole dropped to one knee, gun drawn. The shot came quick and clean. The man toppled soundlessly into the dust. The others shouted, scattering toward the edges. Cole ran for his horse, swung into the saddle, and drove his heels into its sides. The animal surged forward, a black streak tearing through the canyon mouth. Bullets whined around him, one grazing his shoulder, another sparking off a rock near his leg. He didn't flinch. Pain had long ago become part of his blood. He rode until the gunfire faded behind him, until the sun climbed high and cruel over the wasteland. When he finally slowed, both man and beast were drenched in exhaustion. The land ahead was endless, dunes, scrub, and silence. Somewhere beyond it lay the borderlands, and beyond that maybe a chance at rest. But something in him refused to ride farther. Something bound him to Willow Bend. The letter, the woman, the past. He turned in the saddle, staring back toward the distant ridge. The smoke of the hunters' campfires was already curling into the sky like a warning. They wouldn't stop. They'd follow him until one of them fell cold, and Evelyn, she'd be caught in the storm again because of him. He cursed under his breath and urged the stallion onward until he reached a patch of dry mesquite trees. There, half buried in the sand, stood the remains of an old way station, 4 walls leaning like a drunk and a roof barely holding. Inside it smelled of dust, rust, and the faint trace of whiskey left by travelers who never made it far. Cole slid from the saddle, tied the reins loosely, and collapsed against the wall. The world blurred. His shoulder burned where the bullet had grazed him. The wound wasn't deep, but blood soaked through his sleeve. He tore a strip from his shirt, wrapped it tight, and exhaled through clenched teeth. Then he reached into his coat pocket. The envelope was gone. He froze. The realization struck him like a kick to the chest. He remembered pressing it into Evelyn's hands, the look on her face when she saw her own writing. For years, that letter had been his burden. Now it was hers again. What had she written in it? What confession had she sealed away before fate sent it into his cursed hands? He'd never dared to open it, too afraid that her words might destroy what little of his soul remained. But now, the not knowing gnawed at him worse than any wound. He stared through the cracks in the wall, eyes on the horizon. The heat shimmered, bending the air into illusions, shapes that looked like riders, ghosts of men long gone. He knew he couldn't leave things as they were. He couldn't let her face the fallout alone. By dusk, Cole was back in the saddle, heading toward Willow Bend again. The journey felt slower this time, heavier. Every mile carried memories. The night they'd met behind the church, the way her hands smelled of lavender and candle wax, the way she'd traced the scars on his knuckles and whispered that even a man made of sin could still find grace. He'd laughed back then, bitter and broken, telling her grace didn't come to men like him. But she just smiled, said she didn't need grace to love him, just courage. He hadn't been brave enough to stay. As the sun dipped, Willow Bend reappeared in the distance, a lonely cluster of homes shrouded in amber light. Smoke curled from the chimneys and the chapel bell rang faintly, calling people to evening prayer. Cole slowed his horse at the outskirts, keeping to the shadows. The streets were near empty. Only a few ranch hands staggered out of the saloon, laughter slurred with drink. He dismounted near the livery stable, hiding his horse behind a stack of hay. His boots stirred the dust as he crossed the road toward the chapel. He knew she'd go there. Evelyn never missed prayer, no matter how heavy her heart. The chapel doors were open. Candlelight spilled out, flickering against the walls. He slipped inside, silent as a shadow. The scent of wax and pine filled the air, and there she was, kneeling near the altar, her head bowed, the letter resting beside her folded hands. Her lips moved, whispering prayers he couldn't hear. For a moment, Cole just watched. The sight of her like that, pure, steady, unbroken, made something inside him ache worse than the wound on his shoulder. He didn't belong in that sacred light, but he couldn't walk away again. He stepped forward, boots echoing softly on the wooden floor. She turned at the sound, and when her eyes found him, there was no surprise this time. No fear, just quiet resignation. She stood slowly, the letter still in her hands. He stopped a few paces away, the weight of his hat still low over his eyes. Her voice came low and even, carrying more sorrow than anger. "They're saying you're wanted for 5 killings, Cole Maddox." He didn't deny it. The silence between them said enough. She looked down at the letter, then back up at him. "I wrote this the day you left. I thought it would reach you, but it never did. It wasn't forgiveness I sent, it was goodbye." Cole's jaw tightened. "I know," he rasped. I found it in the hands of a dying man. He never made it back. Her eyes flickered, grief rippling across her face. And you carried it all this time? He nodded once. Couldn't let it go. Evelyn's gaze fell to the paper again. You should have opened it. I couldn't. His voice broke like dry earth. Didn't deserve to read your goodbye. The candlelight trembled between them, their shadows stretching long across the pews. Outside, thunder rolled somewhere far beyond the hills, promising rain that might never come. Evelyn stepped closer, close enough for him to see the tears glimmering in her eyes. You still don't understand, she whispered. That letter wasn't just goodbye. It was me trying to bury the man I loved before the world killed him. Her words cut deeper than any bullet. He wanted to reach for her, to tell her the truth that had rotted inside him for years, that every crime, every sin, every drop of blood he'd spilled was his penance for leaving her behind. But before he could speak, the church doors swung open with a crash. Lantern light flooded in, followed by the cold voices of men. Cole Maddox. Step away from the lady. Bounty hunters. Cole turned, instincts flaring. There were at least 4 of them. Rifles raised, silhouettes framed in the doorway. He drew his revolver, stepping in front of Evelyn. The hunters spread out, boots pounding against the wood, the air thick with gunpowder and fury. Evelyn's scream tore through the church as the first shot rang out. The candles flared, smoke filled the air, and the outlaw who had run from everything his whole life finally turned to face it. Gunfire split the silence like lightning through an open sky. The chapel's candles sputtered out in a single gust as smoke and chaos swallowed the room. Cole dove for cover, the thunder of rifles echoing off the pews, splinters flying from shattered wood. The air stank of gunpowder and fear. He fired twice before he could think. One man dropped. Another stumbled back, clutching his shoulder. But more were coming, heavy boots pounding up the steps, shouting over each other in the frenzy of the hunt. Cole reloaded fast, each click of the cylinder steadying the storm inside him. The years of running had sharpened him, carved every ounce of mercy out of his hands. But now, in this holy place, he felt the weight of what he'd become. A man defending himself in front of the only soul who'd ever believed he could be better. Evelyn had fallen behind the altar, clutching the letter tight against her chest. The flickering lamplight caught her face, pale with terror and disbelief. The sound of bullets hitting the pulpit made her flinch, the cross above splintering under fire. Cole shouted for her to stay down, but she didn't move. Her eyes never left him. He moved through the haze like a shadow, firing with precision born from desperation. Every man that fell was another ghost he'd carry, another nail in the coffin of redemption he'd never reach. Then the shooting stopped. Silence returned, broken only by the ragged sound of his breathing. Cole's revolver hung limp at his side, the barrel smoking. 4 bodies lay sprawled across the pews, their blood soaking into the floorboards. The chapel smelled of death and wax. Evelyn rose slowly, her eyes wide, fixed on the ruin around her. Her lips trembled as she stepped forward, skirts brushing through blood that gleamed dark under the candlelight. He tried to speak, but his throat locked. The look she gave him wasn't fear. It was sorrow, deep, unspoken, endless. Cole holstered his gun and took a shaky breath. They'd have killed you, he rasped. Her voice came soft but sharp, cutting through the quiet. They came for you, Cole, not for me. Death always follows you. The words hit harder than any bullet. He lowered his head. The silence stretched between them, filled with the ghosts of everything they'd never said. Evelyn knelt beside one of the fallen men, her fingers brushing the edge of his coat, the badge pinned to his chest glinting faintly.
Deputies, she whispered.
They weren't bounty hunters, Cole froze. His stomach dropped. She looked up at him, heartbreak flooding her eyes. They were sent by the marshal in Dry Creek. They wanted to take you in alive. Cole's pulse roared in his ears. He stared down at the blood spreading beneath his boots, realizing what he'd done. The chapel door creaked in the wind, whispering through the carnage like a ghost come to collect. Evelyn rose to her feet, trembling. You didn't even give them a chance. He shook his head slowly, the weight of guilt pressing against his ribs. Didn't know. Couldn't risk it. Risk? Her voice cracked. Risk what? Losing your pride? You think every man that points a gun means you harm? He turned away, the confession heavy on his tongue. Every man I ever trusted tried to hang me, Evie. I don't know how to stop pulling the trigger. The name Evie lingered between them, soft as prayer and sharp as pain. She closed her eyes, tears slipping free. He took a step toward her, desperate to bridge the years and the wreckage, but she raised her hand. "Don't," she whispered. "Not here. Not after this." He froze, his chest tightening. The sight of her shaking beneath the cross carved something deeper than guilt, something close to despair. The letter was still in her grip, creased and blood-specked. She looked down at it, then back at him, her expression hollow. "You carried this for years, Cole. You said you couldn't open it because you didn't deserve my goodbye. But maybe you should know what you were holding." She unfolded the paper with trembling fingers. Her voice was barely above a whisper as she began to read, but every word hit like a hammer against the quiet. "If this letter reaches you, it means you're still alive. And if you're alive, Cole Maddox, I want you to know that I never hated you. I prayed for you. I waited for you. But love can't live in the dark forever, so I'm letting you go before it kills us both." Her voice faltered. She looked up, tears blurring her eyes. That's all there was. Just those words. "But you kept it like it meant something more?" He swallowed hard, his throat raw. "It did," he murmured. "It kept me breathing." Her eyes met his, the years of hurt, the ashes of love, the faint flicker of something neither of them could bury. "And for what?" she asked. "To die in a church?" Outside, thunder rumbled again, rolling closer. The smell of rain drifted through the broken windows. Cole turned toward the doorway, scanning the horizon. "More'll come," he said quietly. "The town will hear the shots. You need to go. And what about you?" He looked at her, his face carved in shadow. "I'm done running." Evelyn shook her head, stepping closer, her voice trembling. "Don't talk like that." But he just smiled, that faint, sad smile she remembered from the night he'd left. "You gave me a chance to live once. I wasted it. Maybe now I can buy you a little peace." He reached for her hand, but she pulled back, shaking with rage and heartbreak. "Peace? There's no peace in dying, Cole." He looked around the chapel, the shattered cross, the blood-soaked pews, the candles guttering in the draft. "Maybe not, but there's truth, and I'm tired of hiding from it." His hand brushed her cheek. A fleeting touch, a memory rekindled. She didn't pull away this time. Tears traced down her face, catching the faint light. Then he turned and walked toward the open doors. Rain began to fall, soft and steady, washing the dust and blood from the steps. Cole stepped into it, his black coat darkening, his figure blurring in the gray dawn. Evelyn stood frozen at the altar, clutching the letter to her chest. She wanted to call out, to beg him to stay, to find some miracle that could save what was already lost. But her voice broke before the words could come. Outside, the sound of hooves echoed again. Fresh riders arriving, rifles ready. Cole stopped at the edge of the road, his shadow framed by the rising sun. He looked back once, eyes meeting hers through the rain, and for a heartbeat, it felt like forgiveness. Then he turned, drew his gun, and faced the horizon, the outlaw's last stand beneath a storm that refused to end. The rain fell harder, mixing with the blood that stained the chapel floor until everything, sin, sorrow, love, was washed into one color the earth would never forget. The storm rolled over Willow Bend with a voice that shook the earth. Lightning carved the sky in jagged streaks, lighting up the town's silent streets. Thunder followed close behind, a slow, rolling growl that sounded almost human in its anger. Cole Maddox stood alone in that rain-drenched road, gun drawn, hat low, eyes fixed on the shapes coming through the downpour. The new riders had arrived, 6 men, hard-faced and heavy-armed, the kind of lawmen sent when mercy was no longer on the table. Behind him, the chapel door creaked open. Evelyn's voice carried faint through the rain. "Cole, please don't," he didn't turn. The rain plastered his hair to his forehead, mixing with the blood from the graze along his temple. His revolver trembled slightly in his hand, not from fear but from exhaustion that reached his bones. The riders dismounted, boots sinking in the mud. The man in front was the marshal of Dry Creek, tall and cold-eyed, his star dull beneath the stormlight. "Cole Maddox," he called out. "By order of the territory, you're under arrest for murder and robbery. Drop the weapon, son." Cole almost laughed at that word. Son. No one had called him that since his father put him out with a split lip and a curse to his name. He raised the revolver instead. "Don't reckon I can do that, Marshal." The man sighed, shifting his rifle. Then this ends ugly. Cole's gaze drifted to the chapel, where Evelyn stood framed in the doorway, her white dress ghostly against the night. He wanted to memorize her one last time, the shape of her shoulders, the way her hair clung to her cheeks, the sadness that never left her eyes. Lightning flashed, and the world went white. Then the gunfire started. The sound tore through the rain, deafening and violent. Bullets ripped the air apart, splintering signs, kicking up mud. Cole dropped to one knee, firing back in bursts, the recoil jolting through his arm. One man fell, another staggered, the rest spread out, circling. The marshal shouted something, lost in the storm. Cole ducked behind a water trough, reloading fast. His fingers slipped on the wet metal. He'd fought gunfights before, more than he could count, but this one felt different. This one felt like the last. He caught a glimpse of Evelyn running from the chapel toward him, rain soaking her dress, the letter clutched against her chest. His heart lurched. "Go back," he shouted. But she didn't listen. She reached him just as the next bullet struck, splintering the wood beside her head. Cole grabbed her arm, dragging her down behind cover. Her eyes were wild, full of terror and defiance. "You can't win this," she gasped. "Please, Cole, just stop." He looked at her, really looked. The woman who'd once believed in him still knelt beside him, trembling but unbroken. Somewhere deep inside, the part of him that had long turned to stone began to crack. For the first time in years, he wanted to live. Not for himself, but for her. He dropped the gun into the mud. The sudden silence was louder than thunder. The marshal's voice carried through the storm again. "That's it, Maddox. Step out slow. Hands up." Cole hesitated, then rose, mud streaked across his coat, palms open. Rain ran down his face, washing away the blood, the dust, the years of running. Evelyn's voice broke behind him. "Don't hurt him!" The marshal stepped closer, his rifle steady. "You should have done this a long time ago." Cole gave a faint smile, the kind that carried no joy. "I tried," he said quietly. "But the past don't quit easy." The marshal nodded once, signaling his men forward. Two deputies grabbed Cole's arms, twisting them behind his back. He didn't resist. He'd spilled enough blood for 10 lifetimes. The iron cuffs clicked shut, cold and final. Evelyn pushed through the rain, reaching him. Her hands cupped his face, trembling. "You can still tell them the truth," she whispered. "Tell them about the letter, about the man you found dying." Cole shook his head. "Truth don't matter much out here, Evie. All they see is the gun." Tears streaked her cheeks, mixing with the rain. "Then I'll speak for you." He looked at her for a long, quiet moment. "You already have." The marshal tugged him toward the horses, but he stumbled, weakened by the wound in his shoulder. Evelyn tried to follow, shouting something lost in the storm. They forced Cole onto a horse, bound and swaying. Lightning flashed again, painting the scene in harsh silver light. The outlaw finally caught, the preacher's daughter crying in the mud. The marshal mounted up beside him. "We'll take him to Dry Creek, trial at dawn." Evelyn ran after them, her voice cracking. "He won't make it that far, he's bleeding." The marshal didn't answer. The riders turned their horses toward the east road, rain slashing through the darkness. Cole looked back over his shoulder one last time. Evelyn stood alone in the storm, clutching that tattered letter, her dress billowing like a ghost's shroud. Their eyes met. Time stopped. Then the riders vanished into the gray curtain of rain. They traveled through the night. The wind was bitter, the rain relentless. Cole's head dipped low, blood loss blurring his vision. The world swayed with the horse's stride, each hoofbeat echoing like a fading heartbeat. By the time they reached the edge of the canyon, dawn had begun to break, thin, pale light pushing against the dying storm. The marshal called a halt, and they dismounted near an abandoned homestead. Cole's strength gave out the moment his boots hit the ground. He dropped to his knees, coughing blood into the mud. The marshal cursed, signaling the others to steady him. "He's not going to last another mile." One deputy hesitated. "We could take him back to Willow Bend, let the doc patch him up." But the marshal shook his head. "He's a killer, son. Some men just don't make it to trial." Cole heard every word, though his vision had gone dim. He managed a weak smile. "Ain't that the truth?" The marshal raised his rifle. Before he could fire, the sharp crack of another gun split the morning air. The marshal's hat flew off and he stumbled back, eyes wide. From the ridge above, a single rider appeared, cloak whipping in the wind, rifle steady. Evelyn. Her face was pale, but her aim true. Step away from him, she shouted, voice carrying across the canyon. The deputies froze, stunned. The marshal cursed, raising his weapon toward her, but Cole lunged forward, slamming into him. The rifle went off wild, the shot tearing through Cole's side. Pain exploded through him, but he held the marshal's coat tight, forcing him down. The struggle was brief, desperate. Cole wrenched the revolver free and tossed it aside, blood pouring through his fingers. The deputies backed off, uncertain now, their courage wavering beneath the weight of something that felt too much like justice. Evelyn rode down the slope, dismounting beside him. She dropped to her knees, hands shaking as she pressed them to his wound. "Stay with me, Cole," she pleaded, voice breaking. "Please," he smiled faintly, eyes half-lidded. "Guess I wasn't meant to hang after all." "Don't say that," she whispered fiercely. He reached for her hand, his grip weak but steady. "You should have let me go, Evie. I was already half a ghost." She shook her head, tears falling freely. "You were the only man who ever made me feel alive." His breath hitched. "Then maybe—" "I didn't waste it all." The marshal, dazed and wounded, staggered to his feet. He looked at the scene, Evelyn weeping, Cole bleeding into the dirt, and lowered his weapon. The fury drained from his face, replaced by something like pity. "Let her have this," he muttered to his men. "Ain't no use dragging a dying man to judgment." They mounted their horses and rode off without another word, leaving the two of them alone beneath the waking sun. Cole's breathing slowed. The world blurred to golden gray. He could feel the warmth of her hands, the soft rhythm of her sobs. "Evie," he whispered, barely a breath. "That letter. Don't bury it, keep it. Let it remind you I tried." Her tears fell onto his face, salt mixing with the rain. "You did more than try," she said. "You came back." His eyes closed, and for a moment she thought he was gone. But then his lips curved just slightly. "Guess that's something." The wind carried the last of the storm away, leaving only the quiet hum of dawn. Cole Maddox took his final breath with her name on it, and the outlaw's last letter rested in her hands like a promise too heavy for words. The storm had passed, but its ghost still lingered over Willow Bend. The air smelled of wet earth and burned gunpowder, the sky pale as washed linen. Dawn crept slow and heavy across the plains, touching every scar the night had left behind. Evelyn knelt in the dirt long after the riders had gone. Cole lay still in her lap, his body weightless now as though the wind had already begun to claim him. His face looked peaceful, more so than she'd ever seen it. The harsh lines of guilt, the years of running, had all faded beneath the softness of death. She brushed the mud from his cheek, her fingers trembling. Around her, the world had gone silent. Even the birds waited before breaking the stillness, as if nature itself held a moment of mourning for the outlaw who'd finally stopped running. For a long while, she couldn't move. The letter, the one he'd carried all these years, was still folded in her dress pocket, soaked but intact. Its ink had bled slightly, the words blurred like tears. She remembered the night she'd first seen it, when Cole told her it wasn't his to read. He said it belonged to someone better than him. Now she understood. It wasn't a confession. It wasn't even about forgiveness. It was about love, the kind that tries to make peace with a life that's already lost. Evelyn pressed the letter to her heart and whispered a prayer she could barely remember the words to. Then she closed his eyes, kissed his forehead, and rose to her feet. By midday, the news had reached Willow Bend. Folks talked in hushed tones along the boardwalk, about the preacher's daughter who rode into a gunfight, about the outlaw who'd died saving her. Some said it was foolishness, others called it love, but none spoke too loudly. When Evelyn returned to town, she didn't look like the same woman who'd left. Her white dress was stained brown with mud and blood, her hair tangled and windblown, her eyes hollow but fierce. She led her horse down Main Street, Cole's hat tied to the saddle. The sheriff stepped out of his office, hat in hand. "Miss Evelyn," he said softly, "we heard what happened. You shouldn't have gone alone." She stopped, meeting his gaze. "He wasn't alone," she said. "Not at the end." The sheriff nodded slowly, unsure what else to say. The town watched her pass like they were watching something sacred and dangerous all at once. Evelyn stopped at the church. The bell tower loomed above her, weathered and cracked, its rope frayed from years of silence. She climbed the steps, each one echoing with the ghosts of hymns long forgotten. Inside, the air smelled of dust and candle wax. She placed Cole's letter on the altar. For a moment she just stood there, her fingers resting on the edge of the paper. Then she began to speak, not as a preacher's daughter, but as a woman who had seen too much of both sin and grace. "Father," she whispered to the empty church, "I never understood your sermons about redemption. I thought it was something granted, like a gift. But now I see. It's something a person has to chase even when it kills them." She smiled faintly through the tears. He found it. Maybe not in the way anyone expected, but he did. The sunlight slanted through the stained glass, breaking across the floor in shards of color, red, gold, and blue. It fell across the letter, warming it as though the world itself was listening. Evelyn folded her hands and prayed for the first time in years. Weeks passed. The prairie bloomed again after the rains, wildflowers spreading where the mud had dried. Life in Willow Bend slipped back to its old rhythm. Trains whistling at dawn, horses clattering down the street, children running barefoot through dust that would never stay settled. But the story of Cole Maddox lived on. Some said he'd been a killer with a conscience. Others swore he'd only stolen to pay off a dying man's debt. There were those who believed he'd never even been an outlaw at all, just a soul caught between the truth and the law. Evelyn never corrected them. She simply listened. Sometimes from her porch, sometimes from the church steps where the air still carried his name if the wind blew right. She'd moved back into the old parsonage by the edge of town. The garden she tended there began to grow again. White roses and desert sage, the same flowers she used to place on the church altar before her father died. Every Sunday, she'd light a single candle beneath the cross and set Cole's letter beside it. She never opened it again. Some words were meant to stay folded. Like prayers the heart keeps to itself. Still, she could hear him sometimes. When the wind swept low across the plains, it carried a voice soft and low, the kind that once asked her to believe in something impossible. And she did. She believed in the man he'd become in those final moments. The one who laid down his gun not for salvation but for love. One evening near sundown, Evelyn rode out beyond the canyon. The sky was streaked with orange and rose, the kind of light that made everything seem touched by fire and memory. She reached the place where he'd fallen and dismounted. The ground had grown over with grass now, wild and untamed, as though nature had tried to heal what men had broken. She knelt there, brushing her hand over the soil. Then she placed something small and silver into the earth, his revolver cleaned and empty. "Rest now," she whispered. "You've outrun it all." The wind picked up, rustling through the tall grass, carrying her words into the open sky. She stayed until the stars came out, until the prairie shimmered under the soft glow of night. Then she mounted her horse and turned back toward town, her heart lighter than it had been in years. Months later, a stranger rode through Willow Bend, a drifter, weary and dusty, the kind who'd seen too many roads. He stopped by the church for water and found Evelyn lighting candles inside. He nodded toward the folded paper on the altar. "That letter's been there long?" She smiled faintly. "Long enough." He looked curious. "Whose was it?" Evelyn turned to the window, watching the sun spill through the glass. "A man who was once lost," she said, but found his way home before the end. The stranger nodded, tipping his hat. Then maybe he was never truly lost. She didn't answer. When he left, she sat in the quiet pews, the fading light painting her face in color. The church bell tolled softly above, echoing through the town that had once buried its ghosts and moved on. Evelyn reached out, tracing the edge of the letter one last time. Then she smiled, a small, secret smile meant for someone who wasn't there. "Ride easy, Cole," she whispered. "The dust has settled." Outside, the wind stirred the flowers in the yard. Somewhere beyond the horizon, the sun sank behind the plains, leaving the world wrapped in the soft gold of peace. And for the first time since the night of the storm, the prairie was quiet.